Hey there, it's Gary Schuster, your friendly neighborhood inventor, and this is Innovation Cafe. Today, I want to answer a simple question that a lot of people ask me. How do you patent an idea? Well, let's change the question a little bit. How do you patent an idea the right way? Well, we'll start out with the axiom that ideas aren't patentable. An idea standing by itself isn't an invention. It's not anything that is corporeal. It's ethereal. It's just in your head. It's an idea. It would be cool if. Now, most good inventions start with, wouldn't it be cool if? Inventions start with ideas. Stick with them. I don't want you to get discouraged when I say ideas aren't patentable, because ideas lead to patents. But you just have to do a couple things along the way. Not a big deal. You're creative enough. I know it, because all humans are. You can do this. So even though ideas aren't patentable, I'll show you how to turn your idea into a patentable invention. So here are the steps we're going to cover. You have an idea, you develop some solutions based on that idea. You reduce those solutions to practice, and you can do it either in reality, as in you build a prototype that works, or you can reduce it to practice with something called constructive reduction to practice. And that's just a fancy word for saying I described it in my patent application so well that another person having ordinary skill in that field could build it. Before we get too far down the line, I want to remind you, patenting is a legal process. For goodness sakes, get a patent lawyer. You should see my video on picking patent lawyers. It's actually very important to pick one you get along with, pick one who can almost read your mind. It is a long-term relationship, and you really need to pick the right one. But that's not what this video is about. So I just want to remind you, this is not legal advice here. Talk to a patent lawyer. And there is another option. I don't typically recommend it, but I know people who've done it to great success. It's probably my own bias, having gone to law school. But you can use something called a patent agent. And a patent agent is someone who's not a lawyer, but who is licensed by the patent office to help you with your patent application. The big difference between a patent lawyer and a patent agent, other than a lack of familiarity with other laws, is that you don't get the attorney-client privilege. So if you're telling your patent agent something that you don't want anyone else to know, they can be asked about that in a deposition, or they can be subpoenaed for the information, etc. What is an idea? An idea is not actionable. It's just an idea. It would be cool if. It's typically very broad. It's also typically pretty abstract. It's conceptual. Let's do an analogy. It might help. Strategy versus tactics. Strategy is the big picture. Strategy is kind of like your idea. We should invade this country, if done in the sense of a military use. It doesn't tell you how to invade the country. It just says, we're going to do this. Tactics are the inventions. Tactics are, here's what we're doing. Here are the 5 steps or 10 steps we're going to take to act on our strategy. An idea is great. It usually leads to inventions in the same way that strategy is great because it leads to tactics, but they're not the same thing. You can't patent an idea. Not to worry, you will be able to patent your inventions that come out of the idea. A patent application has to teach those having ordinary skill in the art how to do the invention. That's the requirement. It's statutory. It's important to have detail. Here is what I'm actually doing. You should include detail beyond what your patent lawyer says, because patent law is and always has been a moving target in the US and elsewhere, but really lately in the US. It's entirely possible that the range of things that are patentable will grow in the next 10 years. It's also possible that it will shrink. It's possible that there will be additional requirements for enablement. It's possible that they could make software patents completely unavailable. There are all kinds of things that can happen, and we just don't know what will. So when you're writing your patent application, or when your lawyer writes it, and when you're reviewing it, make sure that it is very concrete and it goes way further than you think you need to go in describing the invention, because more detail is always better. You don't want to use what's called patent profanity, which is super limiting language in your patent application. And it's just important to know you don't want to limit yourself. You don't say, this invention must be executed using carbon dioxide gas only, because who knows, there might be another gas that works. Your patent only lasts for 20 years after you file your utility patent application. If it takes too long to issue, you might get some additional time on the back end, but 20 years is the rule we use. So you don't want to file on an invention that is not going to be able to be implemented in less than, say, 18 years, because that would just be silly. You're going to have a 2-year patent life. But you do want to invent for the needs today and the world as it will be in 2, 5, 10 years. Because those are all well within the bulk of the lifespan of the patent, and the world changes, and we can predict a lot of those changes. Moore's law predicted how computing would proceed, and it was very accurate. I can tell you with a fairly high degree of certainty, we'll have batteries with more energy. We'll have storage devices that can store more things. There are certain things that can be predicted, and you should make a habit of trying to predict. So your idea is to do a certain thing. Describe how you would implement it today, and then if the technology exists, how you'd implement it later. I was given a good example of this at a seminar that I went to at the patent office. I asked a really simple question. If prior to the first satellite being launched, I came up with the idea for the GPS system, but we didn't yet have the ability to put satellites into orbit, would that be patentable? And the answer, at least according to the patent examiner, was yeah, that's patentable. So you don't need to have all technology that you can go down to the store and buy today. You just have to be able to describe the technology you'll need and wait for it to come along. So invent for today, invent for 10 years from now. Don't invent for more than about 15 years out, because that becomes way speculative, really expensive. You're going to spend all month writing. I'm going to give you some examples of an idea versus an invention. So it was around 1999. Yes, I know. That was a long time ago. I had the idea of identifying files on a web server that have previously been taken down and got re-uploaded. And we didn't want this to happen. I was a lawyer at a free web host. We had an enormous number of people creating websites for free on our service. So someone would upload an illegal file, say it was a violation of copyright. They would upload Microsoft Word or whatever they were going to upload, and we'd take it down, and we didn't want to have to deal with it again. So I decided, okay, it would be a good idea to have that be an automated process so you can't put it up again after it's been taken down. But the idea wasn't patentable. What did I do? I developed a technique to fingerprint files. I developed techniques to find hidden content in files, to be able to identify content that you've already taken down, even if it's wrapped in some other thing. An example is they used to upload pictures of kittens, and they were just tiny little pictures, like 100 pixels by 100 pixels, but they would be like 50 megabytes. And it's because beyond the end of file marker, they would attach like a full version of Microsoft Word. So I developed techniques to find those. I developed techniques to break binary code that's hidden in something marked as an image or text. I really went through and thought, how will this be implemented in a way that's useful to us? And after having implemented in all those ways, I wrote code. The code was running, it worked, I refined it, and I filed for a patent. Now, this is an interesting question. If you have a patent that involves software in any way, do you include the code? I tend to err on the side of include the code, but most programmers do not like their source code being out there. So it's kind of up to you. It's worth talking about with your patent lawyer. Now, another example, it was around 1999, again, that I had this idea that if you're using software, like say a web browser, and you stopped using it, there should be an ad on it when you returned. So I figured out how to make it happen. It's highly technical, but you look for the on-unload event. You have to avoid interrupting workflow, so you have to be really careful about what kinds of content is on the web page before you erase it to show an ad. Ultimately, I decided the best way to do it would be to overlay the existing content, so you just hit the escape key and it disappeared, coded all that up. It was important also to capture when the window lost focus, and given the standards back then for patent issuance, and they've since changed, I was able to file for a patent on that, and I was able to get a patent on it. As wonderful as it is to see your patent being used by big companies, because it's really validating. It means you had a really good idea. I no longer owned the patent by the time it was being used on devices like the Amazon Kindle, and it's now expired anyhow. So, no harm, no foul, I suppose. I don't know. Same thing with cold fusion. It's just an idea. Wouldn't it be cool if we could fuse helium out of 2 hydrogen atoms and we could do it at room temperature? Amazing. That would be great. You haven't explained how to do it, though. All we know is that that would be a really cool idea. And we've watched scientists for decades now bash their heads against the wall just about trying to figure out how to do it. And it's been elusive. I happen to think that we're finally turning the corner on it, but that's just me. Often, and this is really important, the idea that you have is really the problem. There are so many things that we live with that we really should fix, but no one ever thinks to fix them. So a lot of the time, the hardest problem in inventing is identifying what you're trying to solve for. And once you know what you're trying to solve for, sometimes the solutions are fairly easy to come up with, at least for the inventor who figured out the problem. So if your idea is, I want to solve the problem, it doesn't work. But if your idea is, I've identified the problem and here's 8 solutions and here's how we build them, you got a patent coming to you. Now, how do you turn an idea into an invention? It's something I've covered in a lot of the other videos here. They're inventors' superpowers. They include being able to think like a child, being able to become disinhibited so your thoughts flow freely, being able to harness the power of your subconscious. There are a lot of big picture tips, but there are some actual concrete tips. The first is make sure you really understand the problem you're trying to solve. Next, figure out whether it makes sense for you to try to solve it. There are costs. Is it worth the cost to try to solve it? Do some market research. Would people even buy this invention if I came up with it? And think about the viability. Is this the kind of thing that would have to be done in such extreme circumstances or at such a high cost that no one would even want to do it? Give some thought to the actual nuts and bolts of something you're going to be spending a lot of time and money developing. Now, it is important to let your subconscious in on the fun. Dedicate yourself to solving the problem. Just say, I've identified this problem. I can't think of a solution off the top of my head. I'm going to let my subconscious work on it. And trust me, it will. Also, if you need some experts or you need some inventors to help you dimensionalize things, make sure you get a non-disclosure agreement with them before bringing them in. That's pretty important. You can also do invention sessions. And again, you want to have some kind of non-disclosure agreement. You probably also, with both cases, need to have an agreement that you're going to own the patents that arise out of it. And I did a whole episode before about how to do a patent assignment right. So you could just watch that one, or better yet, seek advice from a patent lawyer, because they're the ones who are really going to get it down for you. And if they get it wrong, they have insurance. There will come a time, hopefully pretty quickly, when you come up with an actionable invention to move forward on your idea. Now, how do you do it? In addition to all the other stuff, I look for analogous problems. What is similar to what I'm trying to solve, and how have those been solved for? And they don't have to be from the same field. It just has to somehow in your head be similar. And that should trigger a whole lot of ideas in terms of how to make it happen. You should also just let your mind wander. Be open to combining different sciences, different arts. It is maddening that you see everyone face down on their phones because their minds never idle, their minds never wander, and it makes it harder to come up with solutions spontaneously. A lot of people do say, do research into the prior art to make sure you understand what's already out there. That's maybe not the best idea if you don't know how to do it right. It is critically important that you make sure to write down every piece of prior art you look at, as long as it's something that a patent examiner might find relevant. It doesn't even need to be prior. It can be something that was written after your invention was developed. You just have to disclose it if the patent examiner would find it relevant. And if you don't, you're going to end up with an invalid patent, having spent all the money and fees and everything else to get it issued. It's not a good outcome. You should also use flowcharts and diagrams if you're a visual thinker. I'm very much a visual learner and visual thinker, but a terrible artist. I do great with photography, but art, no way. So I own graph paper. I've learned how to use the various art programs on computers because it's easier if you're bad at doing art to just do it on a computer. However it is that you normally think efficiently, do that thing and make sure, for goodness sakes, to iterate. Don't take your first invention and say, oh, I'm done, moving on. No, your first invention is usually partially good to solve the problem. It's mostly going to be an entree for other people to figure out how to really solve the problem. So you spend some time on it. You make sure to solve it in a variety of ways if possible. Ask yourself, how can I make this more useful for longer and for more people? Dimensionalize your invention. Now, I'm going to assume in terms of what you're going to file on that you probably want a utility patent, which is exactly what it sounds like. It covers things that are useful, that have utility. If you have an ornamental design, that's a design patent. But if it has a function, it's going to be a utility patent. You want to draft a patent disclosure for your lawyer if you're using a lawyer, or your patent agent if you're using that, or start drafting up a provisional patent application if you're not using either. You can, once you're on file with a provisional patent application, you do get to say your patent pending. So that's a plus. Now, one thing that you'll still see in a lot of advice that is given to inventors is have a bound inventor's notebook and have someone witness the date and time of major developments. It's probably not a bad idea to do, but since the passage of the America Invents Act, it no longer matters when you invented it, it matters when you filed on it. So because the filing date is something that the government already knows because you filed it with them on that date, the bound signed witness notebook is less important. I still use them. I think that they're a great way to stay organized and to keep everything with your invention in one spot. Now you have three choices for your initial patent filing. There's a provisional patent application, a U.S. national phase utility application, or a patent cooperation treaty or PCT application. I did a whole episode on this and I'll just link it down below. So I'm not going to go into detail about it, but usually I advise doing provisionals, and I say provisionals on purpose because during that 1 year between your first provisional and when your utility application has to be filed, you could do multiple provisional applications as you develop additional aspects of your invention. Once you file your provisional, you have a year to turn it into either a PCT application or a U.S. national phase application. Typically, this is the point where people who are trying to represent themselves just go, lawyers have made this so hard, and they hire a lawyer or a patent agent. Also, there are deadlines. If there are no extensions, if you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline for getting the thing filed. So if I invent something and I file it one day after someone else, they get the patent. I don't. If I wait a year and a day to file my PCT after I file my provisional, I lose my priority. It's really important to hit the deadlines. This is a good reason to use a lawyer. Now, once you file your U.S. utility application, what should you expect? Well, you should expect to wait. Now, if you file something called Track 1, you should expect to wait 8 to 10 months. You'll have your first office action for sure within a year. And if you don't, it's 3 to 5 years before you'll see your first office action. Typically, in the U.S., a patent's rejected 3 or 4 times before it's allowed. Track 1 seems to have fewer rejections. Examiner interviews, and I did an episode on that, so examiner interviews are critical. They typically have the number of rejections before you get an issuance. The normal pattern, though, that you should expect is non-final rejection, final rejection. You file a request for continued examination, non-final rejection, final rejection, request for continued examination, and then allowance. I mean, that's if you're going to have 4 office actions. Now, remember that the issued patent, which is wonderful, I mean, you're going to be thrilled to get it, isn't the end of the journey. It's in fact the beginning of the journey. The patent, it turns out, does not arrive with a check. It doesn't arrive with a direct deposit to your bank account. It doesn't arrive with an obvious strategy to enforce it or to build a company around it. You have to do all of that. You have to monetize the patent. You have to make it matter. And that's a subject for a different day. Please write questions in the comments below and I'll be happy to answer them. Again, not legal advice here. Get a patent lawyer for that. But I have a lot of patent experience and it's pretty good practical advice that you just should make sure that your lawyer blesses before you follow. Do ask questions. Please do subscribe if you've enjoyed this. Give me a like. I'm Gary Schuster. And this has been Innovation Cafe. And I want you to remember that that idea that you have floating around in your head will turn into an invention. You will turn that invention into a patent and you will monetize that patent. It's all a matter of wanting to, making it happen, pushing forward on it. You have the creativity. Every human's born with it. So we'll catch you next time. This has been Innovation Cafe signing off.